heart fire flared. Or
Yeah, your ministerial fire flared.
Yeah. So, is there such a thing as heart fire then, or not?
No, I mean, of course there is heart fire, but it's but not in a pathological context.
What do you mean by that?
So only physiological. I mean, heart
good,
fire.
Good heart fire.
Yeah,
so there's only good heart fire.
So that's life. That's the imperial fire. Yeah.
Okay. So when you see all these TCM texts that like I was looking up something and it was heart fire with kidney vacuity. It was actually well, I won't say what it was, but so that doesn't.
That's ministerial. If fire flares, it's no longer imperial. The imperial fire is steady and it does never move. It never goes up. It never goes down. It just is, and it is for as long as you are alive. And as soon as you're dead, it is no longer, right? As soon as there's any type of fluctuation, like flaring of heart fire, it actually is ministerial.
Okay, so when you read about this described as heart fire in these texts, we would, in your tradition, you wouldn't see it that way. You would call that ministerial fire. I should translate it in my mind as into ministerial fire when they're describing a pathological, like cancer, insomnia, horny all the time, whatever, something like that.
Well, how could I say? There's two ways of looking at it. Okay. In a Shanghanlun context, when the flaring of ministerial fire is triggered by an external wind cold invasion, right? That's what we call a Shaoyang conformation disease, right? So then you can't really think of it as having anything to do with the heart or the emotion. Because that wouldn't be the primary symptomology, right? What you're talking about, as far as if primary symptomology is some type of yin deficiency leading to the fire of the heart flaring, right? Then that's Jingui context. That's not Shanghan context, because that's not triggered because of a weather change. That's because of blood loss or consumption of your yin and nutritive and lifestyle and long-term working night shifts and whatever, lifestyle leads to yin deficiency, which then fails to anchor the yang, and then the yang flares, right? And that is basically no longer a heart problem, that's a pericardium problem.
Okay, so all these societal things, people hating their job, hating their spouse, hating being parents, hating being children, all of that stuff that's prevalent. Ministerial fire.
And if the clinical manifestation is excessive, you'll treat it through like triple burner Shaoyang, right? If the clinical presentation is more deficient, which might mean less violent, less whatever, then you treat it through the pericardium, through Jueyin. Yeah.
So look at those formulas in those categories.
Yeah, exactly. Because basically the best example is menopause, right? How they often say menopause is kidney yin deficiency leading to the hot flashes, the flaring of the fire. Now, if that truly was kidney, that would mean that it is the imperial water, because kidney water is imperial water. Heart fire is imperial fire. If you wanna say, okay, well, who's the empress? Well, the kidneys are the empress to the heart, right? Basically, that water, that's the amount of original yin you have in your body. Just like the fire, that's the amount of original yang you have in your body. It doesn't wax and wane. It doesn't suddenly have more, and then you have less, and then you have more again. That's the original yin-yang life force. That doesn't wax and wane, right? So if it truly was the kidney yin deficiency, then how come your fire symptoms, your hot flashes, wax and wane? How come your fire symptoms come and go? Because if it was a true absolute yin deficiency, which means that you have not enough water and that type of kidney water does not wax and wane, then your hot flash has to be continuous. You would have an elevated body temperature continuously, henceforth. Right? It wouldn't wax and wane. Fire that waxes and wanes is ministerial. Right? In Shaoyang, what's the best example of a symptom of that the fire of the minister waxes and wanes?
Alternating fever.
Thank you so much. Alternating chills and fever, right? Because it doesn't have that stamina like the emperor to be on all the time. It's ministerial, right? It grabs all the strength, but as it flares, it auto-consumes and then, and that's the typical nature of ministerial. It flares. As it flares, it auto-consumes and it collapses. Then it regroups again, regains its strength again, and it flares again, and then as it flares, it auto-consumes and it collapses. It doesn't have stamina. Imperial fire is steady, never flares, because it never flares, that's why it's steady. Because otherwise it would auto-consume too fast.
But
It has to be steady.
if someone constitutionally had low levels of kidney yin, would that make them more susceptible to that?
Do you mean low levels of water when you say that?
Low levels of water, kidney yin, is it what TCM calls kidney yin deficient?
What is kidney yin?
Water.
Water. Low levels of water means what? A dehydrated person? Does that mean a person who only has, 55% of their body weight in water?
Well, I can only say what TCM calls it.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But we're exploring the problem with the semantics.
Right, good.
What would that be? What is truly in the kidneys? What is the yin of an organ? What do we call that? What is it?
Blood.
Blood. Blood in an organ, fulfilling a certain function of predominantly the anchoring of yang, of that organ. That is what we call the yin of that organ. Can we state something like that? Yeah. So, you can't really have, it doesn't really exist to have like the yin deficiency of the kidney the way that it is described there.
Okay.
Right? The way it is described in TCM would be the kidney yin deficiency, like not enough blood in the kidneys, therefore failing to moisten the drain wood, therefore not enough moisture ascending through the drain wood so that it cannot wrap itself around the heart.
And failing to cool.
And failing to cool and contain, which still is a pericardium problem. You see? So it still is a pericardium pericardium problem. Right? So that kidney yin deficiency doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in
Does
kidney.
kidney yang deficiency exist?
Kidney yang, the kidneys are not even in charge of yang at all. Have nothing to do with yang. They're not even a fire element organ.
Okay, so when I'm thinking of kidney yang, you're going to call heart yang.
I'm calling it imperial fire.
Imperial fire.
Yes.
Okay. The example that you gave of the guy who his friend is hiding behind the bushes, he comes home and he goes boo, and the guy says, "Hey dude, what's up?"
Yeah, that's heart yang deficiency.
No.
What do you mean?
No, it's not heart yang
What do you mean?
deficiency. The guy.
The guy who's, and he doesn't jump.
respond.
He doesn't jump. Yeah. So his heart yang is not weak.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. But what about the low back symptoms that go with kidney deficiency? The chronic low back, knee pain, low back pain.
So when yang is weak,
Mhm.
yang isn't heavy, right? Yang is high up in the sky. Yang, the heart. If you're thinking of elements, right? Fire element is the south, right? It's standard TCM 101, right? Fire south. Fire is in the south. The sage faces south. So the smart person lives his life in the proper way, which means is always orienting himself in alignment with the sunlight, because they are mammals. We are mammals, warm-blooded animals. We keep our body temperature up. That's why we wear clothes. We contain, we store our body temperature and all that, right? So fire is in the south, all the way high up on top, because we're always facing high noon. So where's fire going to go? Where is the only, up? It's already on top. There's nothing above it. There's nowhere on top of it to go. The only way to go is down. The emperor, emperor occupies the highest hierarchical position in the country. What else is he going to occupy above him? He can't. There is no position above him. So the only purpose there is in being an emperor is to go down and actually connect with the people and rule your country and do things for your country and bring your reign, your rule, down over the country. So that's the function of the yang. So the imperial yang comes from the fire element, right? But it is already on top. So the only place it can go is down, right? So so only a strong emperor can make his reign felt thousands of miles away from the capital. So the emperor has to be strong for that reign to travel and to be felt far, far away from the capital, right? And that's what we say, for the yang of the heart, for the yang of the emperor to go all the way to the tips of your toes, the yang has to be heavy, has to be strong, and only heavy, strong yang descends. Light, weak young stays up. Right? A weak emperor, people are laughing behind his back, even just 10 miles out of the capital. Right? I mean, even in China, everybody knows that. You know, in Guangzhou, do you feel Beijing when you're in Guangzhou? You don't feel Beijing. You feel Beijing when you're in Hebei. You don't feel Beijing when you're in Guangzhou. I mean, Guangzhou, like even the early 90s, had sex shops and adult stores and all that stuff. In Beijing, they still don't have them. I mean, I don't know. It's been a while that I've been there. But you know what I mean? Like, so because the rule of the emperor is it's weak when you get to the coastal provinces. Right? So that's the same principle. So yang has to descend. So all the warmth that you have in the spleen comes from where? From the yang descending of the heart. All the warmth you have in the lungs come from where? From the yang descending from the heart. All the warmth you have in the kidneys comes from where? From the yang of the heart.
That's the ministerial, because that's the movement of the body.
Any particle of fire outside of the heart is actually ministerial. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, but associate that with the low back and...
So then, for example, so if the kidney yang deficiency means that the yang of the heart is too weak, therefore not descending and not warming the water of the kidneys. The water of the kidneys, then if it doesn't receive any sunlight, it freezes. Just like at the bottom of the ocean, the Mariana Trough, for example, right? At the bottom of the ocean, the water at the bottom of the Mariana Trough is sub-freezing point. It's water, but it's sub-freezing. Why? Because sunlight does not penetrate that deeply. It is pitch black. Now, if you scoop a bit of that water and you bring it to the surface and you look at it, it's perfectly transparent. But if it's because there's so much water and it's so deep down, there's not a single ray of sunlight. Right? So the yang cannot reach there, and that's why it freezes at the bottom. And because then yang, that's what we call kidney yang deficiency. But there is no yang in the kidneys. The kidneys have no yang in and of themselves. They receive the yang from the heart. Now, how do the kidneys store that yang? First of all, how does that yang get from the heart to the kidneys? How does the yang get from the heart to anywhere in your body, for that matter? By blood. Of course. What is yang? Yang is the warmth that emanates from the blood. Right? So the heart has to pump strongly, pump this highly oxygenated, warm blood away from the heart to the tips of your toes. Right? And of course to the kidneys and to the organs and so forth, right? So when the kidneys receive this warm, highly oxygenated blood, that is what that means, heart and kidney communicating. That is what means that the kidneys receive the yang of the heart. They get this warm blood pumped into them. And then when the kidneys receive that warm blood pumped into them, they can fulfill their functions of being kidney-like, whatever those functions are. Opening, closing, urination, whatever those functions are.
If they don't communicate, is it likely to be a problem of the kidneys not being receptive, or of the heart's inability to send it down?
There's many possibilities. Many possibilities.
Okay.
The water could be so cold that the sunlight can't get in it. And that would be due to too much excess water that there's no way that the fire of the heart can penetrate into it. Right? Could be that the water is not that cold yet. It's just that the heart yang is so weak it floats. It doesn't sink in, it floats. Right? It's just a matter of time, of course, before the water of the kidneys will get cold then. Could be that, for example, you're constipated and you've got all this fullness in the abdomen, so the heart cannot communicate, because as the yang of the fire has to go down, it has to go through metal, through earth, into water. Right? And it can't get through there because those areas are clogged up. It could be clogged up with dry, solid matter, but the earth could equally be clogged up with cold, damp in the center, also trapping the yang that's trying to descend through the earth into the water element. There can be many, many, many reasons why the fire of the heart is not reaching the kidneys.
And when people are pissed off, their ministerial fire flares.
Yes.
I mean that's one example of what makes it flare. And so when it flares, then it goes up or it goes to the surface.
When it flares, it surges up. Ministerial fire surges up. Yeah.
Is that because the liver is fanning fire?
Is that because the liver is fanning? I don't know exactly if I can answer that. Yeah, for sure, for sure. But is that why it goes up and doesn't float out? That's a good question. I don't know exactly if I can. I don't know. I would have to think about that. Like, why does anger not make the young float? Rather, why does anger make the young surge up? Probably because of drain is up, right? And so the emotion that's related to the anger is a liver, gallbladder emotion. Maybe that's why. Yeah.
Isn't surging like floating?
No, surging is up,
Because they're both
floating is out. That's different.
And so that's why with like treating rashes and all these things, you're trying to send rather than clearing heat from the surface, you're sending the yang back down so it gets out of the surface because it's supposed to be going down.
Physiology is always yin sitting on the outside of yang. Because if yin is not on the outside of yang, then yang just leaves the body. I mean, you have to hold on to it, right? So if you want to hold on to it, like you have to do this, right? You have to grab it like that. Like you have to wrap yourself around something to hold on to it, right? So yin on the outside of yang, that's the only possible way to actually have any type of physiology. When you try to boil water, you can't, it doesn't work when you have a pot of water that you put under the fire. Fire sits on top, water sits below, fire's just going to burn until there's no more fuel left to burn. Water's just going to sit there ice cold. Nothing's happening. That's what we call failure to communicate between water and fire, right? So if you want any type of physiology, then you have to put yin on top of yang. When yin is on top of yang, then the yang actually heats up the yin and produces the 10,000 things, right? So physiology is that you have yin on the outside of yang containing the yang, right? Once yang is on the outside of yin, then you have a heat problem, right? So any type of heat symptomology that we have is the wrongful location of yin and yang, which means that either yang is sitting on the outside of yin or yang is sitting on top of yin. And you have to rectify that by actually either inverting that situation by either putting yang below yin again or putting yang on the inside of yin again. Now you could put yang on the inside of yin or you could put yin on the outside of yang. You can have a Baihuthang type of heat with all the yang rushing out. So then what does Baihuthang do? Baihuthang puts yin on the outside of that yang that's floating out. But you can have a similar all the yang rushing out due to yang deficiency, not due to excess heat, but due to yang deficiency, right? Where all the yang is floating on the outside and there's only yin on the inside, and then you have to, for example, use a Tongmai Sinitang, a Fuzi formula, not to put yin on the outside, but now to put yang on the inside of yin. And that's, of course, real heat, fake heat problems, right?
It's floating because it's weak, doesn't descend.
Yeah,
Doesn't go
yeah.
down.
Can't get into the water because there's too much cold on the inside. The yang just can't get in. And if it can't get in, it's not being stored.
Your example of excess is Baihuthang, but where I'm struggling with is like people that seem excess, but they're not febrile. You know, like they seem so abundant, and then they get this, what seems like floating yang.
Yeah.
But
I mean, floating yang, insomnia is also floating yang, right? Losing your hair is also floating yang, right? Spermatorrhea is also floating yang. I mean, it doesn't always have to, fever is also floating yang. Yeah? Mouth ulcers is floating yang. Bloody nose is floating yang. Red eyes is floating yang. Tinnitus is floating yang. I mean, the clinical presentation of floating yang is multifold. I mean, there's a myriad of possibilities. It doesn't always have to be fever. Cough is floating yang. Retching is floating yang. Headache is floating yang. I mean, need I go on?
So yang deficiency will give floating yang, but all floating yang is not necessarily due to deficiency.
Excess or deficiency, right? Like I said, it can be, yeah. Everything in Chinese medicine is this or its complete opposite. And everything in between. No, everything can be this or its complete opposite, right? Every coin has two sides, right? So it could be this or its complete opposite, yeah. Of course, you always have to be open to that possibility. It's not something that's fun to be open to because it does complicate things.
When you were talking about aconite in earlier classes, like tucking the yang back in, I think that was aconite.
Mhm.
Tucking, use this phrase, tucking it back in. Aconite is it's forcing it to descend down into the kidneys, or
Mhm.
just it's forcing it to descend.
Yeah,
And
but
it's
how,
forcing it to descend.
but the way to do that is still to boil the water from the inside out. So you're boiling the water from the inside because fudzi is a water boiling herb. That's exactly what it is. It switches on the gas burner underneath the water. When you switch on the gas burner underneath the water, the air particles inside the water start to expand and heat up. That's why you get bubbling inside boiling water, right? As soon as the bubbling starts to happen inside boiling water, you also at the same time start to see the evaporation of the water. And that's exactly the same process. So bringing yang back inside the water means you bringing the water to a boil to create a vapor, and then the vapor is going to be the yin that then will put itself on the outside of the floating yang. So you can put yin on the outside of floating yang by actually, adding yin, like a juye shi gao tang or something like that, where you have mai men dong and those kinds of herbs that you actually put in the lungs, or which is also putting yin on the outside of yang. Or you can also just say there's too much stagnant water in the body. I'm gonna just turn that into a vapor and also put yin on the outside of yang. The difference is that in a real heat situation, the yin that you're putting on the outside of yang is a cold yin. In a real heat situation, because you need to cool the body off because the person has aversion to heat. In a fake heat situation, the person has aversion to cold, so the vapor, the water that you're putting on the outside of yang is a hot vapor to warm them up. But it's still a water. It's still a yin. So whether you're clearing heat or whatever, it always is in the function of yin-yang communication. It's always in the function of storing your yang inside yin.
So you would never use Zhibai Di Wang Wang? I'm sorry, is that
That's a difficult question.
okay?
Let me answer it as following. Dr. Tian used Zhibai Di Huang Wan in very rare occasions that I am not privy to understanding yet. The last time I used Zhibai Di Huang Wan probably was never. I've never used Zhibai Di Huang Wan in my life, which probably greatly contributes to the fact that I don't understand Zhibai Di Huang Wan. I mean, I can teach you everything anybody else can teach about Zhibai Di Huang Wan. But clinical, visceral understanding of Zhibai Di Huang Wan I do not have. Yeah. It is conceivable that you might still temporarily use it. But know that for every type of heat, whether it's excess heat or deficiency heat, what you lose is your yang. Every split second of flaring of heat, of fire, is a split second of loss of yang. And life is yang, and you always have to come back to storing yang, preserving yang, adding a bit more yang, topping it off a little bit. Right? Even if you temporarily use Zhibai Di Huang Wan, you will ultimately still have to switch him back to Sen Qi Wan. Have to. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise, if you keep freezing fluids, in the beginning you're like, yeah, I'm freezing the yang inside the fluids, I'm storing it. But you keep freezing fluids, you also cool off yang, and what's ultimately going to happen, you've created such a thick ice pack that the yang of the heart can no longer get in it anymore, and then yang suddenly flips and it stays outside again. And all the deficiency heat comes back again. You're like, wait a minute, I'm giving you Zhibai Di Huang Wan forever, and you were responding just fine in the beginning, and now all of a sudden, all your deficiency heat symptoms come back. Yeah, you've given too much of it. In the beginning, it was fine to bring the yang in and trap it and internalize it. But then you had to make yang stronger, so it was able to descend and internalize by itself. Now you've frozen the yin too much, yang can no longer penetrate into it by itself anymore, and now yang stays outside, and now you've got all these deficiency heat symptoms again. You've gone too far.
If someone has the kind of lifestyle that causes ministerial fire and floating yang, and you give them Shen Qi Wan, and they continue the lifestyle, then what happens?
Then you ruin your reputation as a clinician. Because then they'll walk around saying, it doesn't really help. Didn't really do much. Yeah, of course not. You didn't change your lifestyle. I mean, it takes two, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I get these patients like, I have a 50-year-old male patient who masturbates 4 times a day. And he's a stud.
Respect.
Yeah, he's a stud. You know, I mean, he's like a champion snowboarder and surfer, and he surfs probably without a wetsuit in the middle of winter.
Nice. Does he snowboard without clothes?
Yeah. So, yeah.
While he
And he masturbates at night. He can't go to sleep if he doesn't masturbate at night. That part I get at least, you know, psychologically, but then in the morning again, that's the part I don't quite, I mean, yeah, I guess.
Vicious cycle. So the more you deplete your yang and your yin, because that's of course what this does, right? You send it out with a flash. That's why it makes you feel so happy. And for men, of course, you lose the blood, you lose the semen, right? So yin gets weaker, so it cannot anchor yang properly, right? You deplete the yang, so yang has more tendency to float. Yang constantly stays up, so you're constantly thinking about sex. So it becomes a self-perpetuating thing, right? So ultimately, you know, to kind of make, you know, he will be driven to continue this behavior, because he created this separation. It's a separation pattern. It's a separation pattern. So he got himself into the state where now his body will continue to do that. Yeah. And the more sex you have, the more you want to have sex. There's no question about that.
Chocolate too.
Chocolate too, yeah. I have less.
Not having sex, then you have.
Yeah, yeah, I have less experience with it. Yeah. But no, you know, so that's exactly true, right? You get into this because then you have no yin, you can't anchor your yang floats, so you want to have sex, so then you have more sex, so then you have less yin, you can't anchor your yang, so you want to have, you know, it becomes a vicious cycle.
Is this term
Right.
separation syndrome or whatever you just
Yin
call
yang
it?
separation, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
That's the yin yang separation is the main cause of illness and the forebode of an untimely death. That's exactly what that is. Yes.
You said earlier that yin is blood,
Mm-hmm.
and now that yang emanates from the blood to create warmth. So I'm trying to understand it, or I can understand that as difference between function
Mhm.
and substance,
Mm-hmm.
but also it sounds like also yang outside of yin. If yang is emanating from
Yeah. That's how we warm our body surface, how we warm our tissues and stuff. Yeah, it's true. So that's why we lose yang, and that's why we ultimately die. I mean, otherwise, if yang was in perfect storage constantly, we would live forever. But that's impossible. That's why. So we warm our skin. When you urinate, the urine that leaves your body is warm. So you're constantly losing some yang. There's no question about that. You know, when you exercise or you labor, you lose some yang because you sweat a bit. So yeah, we do deplete our yang. We just want to do it, you know, in a proper, healthy way so that we can live our normal intended lifespan. Yeah, that's the goal. But yes, of course, we lose yang. Yeah. Ultimately, it's very important that we get back to a very important aging concept, which is that yin-yang don't exist.
Yin-yang what?
Yin-yang don't exist.
Don't exist.
Yeah. Yin-yang, you ming wu shi, they have a name, they don't have substance. They don't exist. They are man-made terms. It's a man-made theoretical model to explain the physiological processes of the body. The only things that exist in the body are water, air, and blood. Right? And then the only two physical states of being are hot and cold, and gradients thereof. Right? So those are the real things. But yin-yang is the model that we use to explain it. But like kidney yin and those kinds of concepts don't exist in the classics. You will never find a place in the Neijing that says kidney yin something something something. Doesn't exist. Sui dynasty is the earliest time, which is like what, around 600-700, where the earliest time when they started to use that kind of a nomenclature, that kind of a semantic. But it doesn't exist in the classical times. They just talk about blood, nutritive, protective. They'll talk about that. Protective being more motion, more what emanates from. Nutritive being more the nutritious substances and material things in your body. Those kind of things do exist. But yin-yang as substances, as things that you could possibly actually put in a box and ship with FedEx, doesn't exist. Doesn't exist. Yeah.
So the way that I've kind of got into my mind, the way you're explaining it, is that in every degree of the temperatures of hot and cold, and let's talk about floating yang, theoretically I could use futsa in almost every situation.
Nope.
Because I could use it to vaporize, to send up vapors to cool yang, and then the colder or the lesser the floating of yang or the lesser the heat, I would use larger doses of futsa because then I would be warming.
I know exactly what you mean, and there are a few people who, of course, Fire Spirit School would love that concept because, you know, it's good for their marketability. But
I knew that was coming.
you know, but actually no, because there's a time and place for everything, and this, what you say is theoretically, of course, it's always about yang. Yes, you got that part. However, when you are having yang ming heat, like a bai hu tang situation, right?
Because we wouldn't do it because of the tongue.
Not even about the tongue. It's about, you wouldn't do it because the sensation that the patient is having is they have aversion to heat.
Oh.
They need to be cooled off. So only when a patient has aversion to cold can you use
So
futsu.
it has to have that one element.
Exactly,
Whether it's 12
exactly,
feet, whatever.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So that's very important that you keep that in mind. Like there is one of the lines of the Shahanlun talks about Bai Hu Jia Ren Shen Tang, right? We know Bai Hu Tang plus Ren Shen, right? And its main symptom is mild aversion to cold on the back. So they have aversion to cold on the back, but you're still using a Bai Hu Tang. Why do they have an aversion to cold on the back in Bai Hu Jia Ren Shen Tang? Because they are actively depleting massive amounts of yang. Bai Hu Tang, you can't have aversion to cold yet because you're in the process of depleting and too much yang is passing through your skin that your skin is really getting radiation burns from it and is feeling really hot, right? But after a while, Bai Hu Jia Ren Shen Tang is always after you got through the Bai Hu Tang stage and you're starting to deplete, right? That's when you can start to see already the onset of not yet full-blown aversion to cold on the back, but at least mild aversion to cold on the back. But you still have to use Bai Hu Jia Ren Shen Tang to anchor the yang. Now, if a person has had a Bai Hu Tang pattern, and they've had this high fever, big sweat for a longer period of time, and you fixed all that, what would be a very good herb for them?
For instance,
You fixed all that.
I fixed all that.
Then you can go and say, okay, well, then you need a yang tonic. Because what you just did is lose massive amounts of yang. Right? So then you can say, okay, we'll give you a yang tonic, right? But not at the time when they're going through the actual heat that is burning their skin and irradiating their lungs and causing all the heat sensations. That would be the wrong time. Because otherwise you could say, oh yeah, we could treat everything with futsu. Oh yeah, bai hu jia futsu tang. It's been attempted, but that's wrong. That's wrong. Everything has a time and a place. Yeah, you can't treat that at the same time.
One little question, when you give that example of yes, maybe you might use, though you've never had Zhibai Diwan one short term and then go to Shenqi one. Short term, do you mean 2 days or a week? Could 10 days be short term?
Since it's a pill, I would think that it would be longer than 10 days. Yeah,
and
because
that's what you mean by short term.
yeah, just a one. If it's traditionally done, it should be longer term. I mean, I cannot imagine. I mean, like a month or so, at
Okay.
least. That would be short term for a
Yeah,
pill, I think.
okay,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. But yeah, there's some fire spirits guys. One famous one was lived in Shanghai in like the 1920s or so, Zhu Weiju, and he was an expert on febrile diseases, but he was fire spirit school. So even in his intense heat clearing formulas, and he used a lot of mineral herbs in those and all, intense heat clearing formulas, even in those formulas, he would always have a little bit of futsu. Like he'd have a ton of heat clearing herbs, but I'd put a little futsu in it. Yeah, not necessary. I mean, yeah, it's not necessary. What's here, treat this now, then go to the next phase. All right, that's what Zhang Dongjing says. Zhang Dongjing doesn't have Ma Huang Fuling combinations. He doesn't have Chai Hu Shigao combinations. He doesn't have Chai Hu Dangui combinations. He doesn't have blah, blah, blah. There's a ton of combinations that he doesn't have. That in TCM they would do. Why not? Because Zhang Dongjing is much more precise. His system is a system of minimal intervention. You'd never do more than you need to at any given moment. And you're only treating small slices of an issue, fix that, then move to the next issue. Don't try to do it all at once. Don't go broad spectrum approach. It's very, very focused approach, right? So you first fix your Chai Hu gallbladder problem, fixed, okay, then you move to fix the liver. Not do it at the same time, right? So he's much more careful with that. And that's, I strive for that too. I'm not saying, I mean, Chaiga Jeji Tang, I mean, millions of times it gets used in clinic, and it's a formula that is the product of a school of thought that was very much Shahanlun, but trying to fuse with Wenbing ideas that were also starting to get more popular in Ming Dynasty. Fine, at least they're still somehow classically trained. I don't need Chaihu Shiga at the same time. I don't do it. Like either Danonjing says triple yang disease. Normally, triple yang disease, you use a Shaoyang formula and you build Yang Ming and Taiyang elements on top of it, which is exactly what Chaika Jejin Hang does. Danonjing doesn't do that. Danonjing says, okay, if it's triple yang disease, normally it's Chaihu with maybe whatever. But if the fever and heat is so intense, first treat the Yang Ming intense fever, and then you can go back and treat the rest. Treat the main problem, the most dangerous problem in front of you first. Don't try to treat it all at once. So then he says in one of the lines, triple yang disease, he says Baihutang. He doesn't say Chaihu Guijiganjang or Chaihu Longumuli or something like that. You see, so he's very precise. Good. Anything else? Can we continue? Yeah. Baishao. Baishao Tangi Jing calls it sour. Now we normally consider it sour. Benta Jing calls it bitter. There's a lot of discussion about it. Maybe the aspect of the whole cultivated versus not cultivated, the processed versus not processed. I mean, Chishao versus Baishao, whatever, because in the old days it was called Shaoyao. I don't know. I'm not a botanist. I don't know. I'm not an expert on powder, on processing. All I know is my teacher uses Baishao and his teacher used Baishao, and we never use Chishao, and that's what I do. Right? I defer to the lineage because I don't have any other answers anyway. So I just defer to what they did, and I trust their judgment. Right? So by virtue of it being metal related, I think the fact that it's makes sense to me as well. Often when you're using it in blood-moving formulas, I think it often provides the checks and balances in your blood-moving formula, right? The biggest example of that is Guizhi Fuling Wan, where you Guizhi Baishao Fuling Taoren Mudan Pi, which is a formula for masses that you treat, uterine masses that you treat during pregnancy. During pregnancy, well, I know, why do we even bother? Why are we even going to treat it? Well, yeah, preferably we wouldn't treat it, and we wouldn't treat it if it wasn't bleeding. But if the mass is bleeding, then the person is losing blood. If the person is losing blood, they are losing a valuable resource that the body needs to gestate the fetus with, gestate the child with, right? So you can't afford to lose the blood, so you still have to stop the bleeding. But the only way to stop this type of bleeding is by actually getting rid of some of the stasis, because this is blood stasis-induced bleeding, right? And that's where this formula comes into play. In that formula, even a lot of textbooks now say to use Chishao, which in my opinion is wrong. Right? I think it is Baishao, because Baishao, and I've said this before, is, in my opinion, it is like you have let's say you have a bucket of water, right, or a bowl of water or something, right? It's not like an actual lid that would allow you to shake it as violently as you want and it wouldn't spill. It's like a saran wrap, like a fresh wrap, that, the sticky type, that you put over the bowl or over the bucket, which you can shake it a little bit and it won't spill as easily as if it didn't have the saran wrap on it, but it's not that you can actually overturn the bucket. So it's an herb that mildly keeps the integrity of the blood and keeps the blood inside the liver system. Why? Because, of course, pungent moves something away from the liver, sour pull something into the liver, right? Because, of course, if the liver wants to spread freely, swiftly give it pungent, right? Because it is tonified with pungent and reduced with sour. So the spreading away from the wood, right, like a tree growing in all directions, that spreading away from wood, from liver, is done with pungent, right? Going against the spreading away from liver is, of course, done with sour. So sour kind of keeps it tucked in a bit. It's almost like it's an invisible film that you put over the blood and kind of keep it a little bit tucked in so it doesn't spill so easily, right? So that is that. And that's why we use Baishao, the same way that if you're using Chishao in one formula because Danoding doesn't specify, then you got to use it in all formulas. Well, then why not do Chishao also in, I don't know, Guizhitang and Shaqinglongtang and whatever other formula, right? I mean, no double standards, please. Right? So that's that. So in the Bentao Jing, first of all, it talks about abdominal pain. That is by all means the primary indication of Baishao, right? It treats the abdomen. That's why it's the earth herb of the metal class. Tonifies metal because it's sour. If it tonifies metal, it means it suppresses wood because it's sour, it suppresses wood. And if it suppresses wood, it protects the earth. And the earth is, of course, the abdomen, which is the domain of the spleen, domain of the earth, including also the muscles. So it also protects the muscles, right? It's definitely Xiaoyao Gancao Tang, we will see in a second, is definitely a primary formula to relax and protect the muscles, right? Relax them and protect them from spasming and contracting and so forth, right? Then second function is that it eliminates blood obstruction, which is a blood stasis eliminating function, right? It can treat hardnesses, it can treat hernia, tumors, so it stops pain, and so forth. Interesting function is that it promotes urination, smoothens the urination, and it benefits the qi. Benefiting the qi, definitely the way Zhang Jing uses it, because Bai Shao cuts earth a break. Right, it cuts it a break, gives it a little bit of a breathing room, right? Because wood is constantly taking the earth's resources and sending it everywhere. Wood is like a philanthropist, right? The earth is the bank account, the storage house, the kitchen, slaving in the kitchen, working its butt off, and then wood's the person who's inviting all the neighbors over all the time. Right? Hey, come on over here, have some of this, have some of that. Here's my money. Here, take this money. Oh, take this. And earth's like, could you cut this out for Christ's sake? Because I'm like tired here, okay? I'm working hard, I'm producing, and you're just giving it all away. Right? That is indeed wood fanning the earth, right? Because all the resources of the earth, right, they have to be distributed. And of course, it is wood's function to move them in all directions, right? Especially move them to the heart and to the lungs. And then from there, they can go throughout the whole body, traveling the fluid and gas matrix through the lungs and traveling the blood matrix through the heart, right? That's how all the nutrients distribute through the rest of the body, right? From Chinese medicine's perspective, right? But of course, if the earth is weak and tired, and then the wood is just like, hey, take it all, then of course, earth gets really weak. So then you have to give it a little slack, cut it some slack. So Bai Shao will stop that action. It'll reduce the action of wood taking Earth's resources and distributing it freely like a good communist. Right? So then by Bai Shao, you're backing the wood off of the earth a bit, and the earth's like, okay, for a second now, I can sit down and have some food myself. Because it's like making pancakes for a big family, right? It's like you're making, and it's just like they're eating them, and you're like, okay, by the end of the meal, everybody's out of the kitchen. You're sitting there by yourself eating the last pancake left, which was the first one you made, which was at the bottom of the pile, right? I know that. I make pancakes, so so that's why the spleen is the most humble, but also the most abused organ, right? The P, like the radical, is the flesh radical, but then it's of course Bei, and Bei means inferior, right? Humble, inferior, it's just the slave, right? So that's kind of where that comes into play. So Bai Shao benefits the qi of Taiyin. It benefits the production of nutrients from the center. Right? And it promotes urination. It benefits, smoothens urination. I think there's a few ways of looking at it. If you're looking at it from a Chishao perspective, you could say, well, if it moves blood, it moves fluids. Proper descent of blood allows for proper descent of fluids. Yeah, okay. I can get with that. That's fine, but we don't use Chishao, right? From a second perspective, you could say, like in Sunisan, one of its primary, has a whole list of indications. One of its indications is promotes urination. Difficult urination, right? So Sunisan, difficult urination, is qi, gases and fluids not descending properly because of qi stagnation. But why is it not descending properly? Because the pathways through which gases and fluids have to move are too contracted. So what Bai Shao, and clearly in clinic very commonly used that way, what Bai Shao does, it decontracts the tissues through which gases and water and fluids flow. right? So, and it does that with blood actually the same way. So it kind of decontracts the tissues to let proper passage and proper transit through those tissues. So spasming of the urethra, spasming of the bladder, the smooth muscle of the bladder, right, gets relaxed with Bai Shao, therefore allowing for fluids to descend more easily. Arno, can't buy that. I can't accept that. Why would Bai Shao suddenly have an effect on urological tissues? I mean, all I know is that Bai Shao is wood, is liver, uterus. I can see how that would work, but why would it work on the urethra? Because ultimately, they share the same anatomy. Right? The urethra, in men's cases, is the most obvious, right? It does as much for the passage of semen as it does for the passage of urine. Right? And the bao and the pao in Chinese language, so we talk about those in one breath very often, which is bao pao, womb and bladder. Right? The pao is the bladder, the bao is the uterus. Right? They basically are one and the same type of tissue. They're part of one and the same type of system. And this system is very blood intense. How do you know that this system is blood intense? Because when you're talking about the qi blood allocation of the conformations, right? Which ones are lots of blood? There's two, Taiyang and Jueyin. So Taiyang and Jueyin are lots of blood, little qi. Taiyang bladder, Taiyang small intestine, Jueyin liver, Jueyin pericardium. Heavy on the blood, very little to do with qi. And so those tissues are nourished by the same type of thing, are dense in the same type of thing. Right? So Bai Shao is definitely a blood layer herb. It relaxes the spasming of those tissues. Right? Uterus, bladder, it's all the same thing. Guizhi warms the uterus, Guizhi warms the bladder, Guizhi moves the urine, steams up the urine, Guizhi moves the blood. Same thing. Whether you're using Guizhi Fuling, you're using Guizhi Taoren, it's the same idea behind it. Right? So that's the same thing. So then, from that perspective, Bai Shao, I think, has two ways. One is on the tissue level, it decontracts the tissue so that fluids can descend. They're not staying trapped. And fluids, you don't even have to push. Gravity already will help you because they are physical and subject to gravity. This is different than gas, right? Gas, you actually have to descend. But fluids, just give it some time. They will descend as long as the pathway is relaxed enough to open, right? So that's more on the tissue level. Second of all, is just on a 5-element level. When you back wood, which is sending stuff up, when you back that off of earth, making the earth stronger, making the earth more focused on its task at hand, it has much more strength in making sure that fluids get pushed down. And that's more in the capacity of like a Zhenwutang or a Fuzitang, where you have Baiju Fuling, which are, of course, primary herbs to regulate the water, and Fuling pushes the water down from the earth. Baiju pulls the water down from the water element, pulling it off of the earth into the water element, right? And then Bai Shao, you could say, decontracts the tissues, yes, but also benefits the earth, makes the earth stronger. And then the earth is stronger, it is stronger in fulfilling its task which is one of its tasks is to control water. Right? A strong dike controls water, holds the river back. Right? So from that perspective. So I that would be my explanation on how we could look at Bai Shao being an herb that promotes urination or smoothens urination. I don't think, however, that it's a diuretic herb. I don't look at it like that, like an herb that actually actively pushes the water. I don't think it's like that. It just works indirectly.
Just getting back to what you were saying about the liver before, it seems like the wood, whatever it's supposed to do, it overdoes it. I mean, the very functions that the very function of taking over the earth or repressing the earth is an overdoing of what it's supposed to be doing, which is moving the qi.
I mean, I don't know if it would. I mean, there's always. I mean, in a normal, healthy, functioning system, there's always a commensurate amount of metal controlling the amount of wood. But I think any element would overdo it unless its controlling element is there to curb it, right? So I think we use metal shears and scissors to trim and prune the plants in our garden and the trees in our garden. That's the normal thing, because otherwise they'll just keep growing and they might just grow out of control. Right? So it's kind of the same thing. You need some type of metal control, and normally that's present in a healthy functioning system. If not, then you need to tonify metal, which is done with a sour flavor. right? If the tree is growing too tall, then you use jushu. If the tree is growing too sideways, you use baishao, right? For example, if the tree is so tall that it catches on fire, you use huangqin. No, something like, I don't know. But you know what I mean, right? It's you know baishao huangqin, like a huangqin tang or something like that. Mingi Bielu says sour. He's going with the sour. Main function is on the blood vessels. Moderates the center. Gets rid of stagnant blood, bad blood. Also gets rid of stagnant water. Just kind of echoing everything that's already being said, I would say. Benefits the bladder, in kind of the smooth muscle of the bladder. Benefits large intestine, small intestine. Not necessarily sure how it would directly benefit the small intestine unless you really are looking at it from a bitter perspective. From a bitter perspective, a small intestine is fire element. From a bitter perspective, then you could say, okay, it reduces the child of the fire element. So it leads excess away from the small intestine, right? Out through the large intestine, right? Yangming large intestine. I could see that. From a sour perspective, you can't really put it on the small intestine because, you know, yeah, there's a sour astringent onto the shen, but there's no sour astringent onto the small intestine, really. That's not really possible. You know, the sour flavor does not go to the tissue of the small intestine directly. Yes, pain. Good, main function, pain. Todo says very clearly it treats excessive congestion, restricted pulling. The congestion that is treated with baishao is indeed a spasming up of the tissues through which normally the content of the digestive system has to move, right? Think of the formula guijia xiaoyao tang, a lot of cramping in the abdomen, right? And then the modification of guijia xiaoyao tang, which is guijia dahuang tang, which is guijia xiaoyao tang plus dahuang. So it's cramping up, ow, that hurts. It's cramping up, ow, that hurts, and it's trapping the transit of fecal matter through the tissues. That's okay, then we have to add something. Just decontracting is not enough anymore. You also have to add some dahuang to actively get rid of what's trapped, right? So that would be an example of that. And that's, of course, where he's coming from. Excessive congestion or congesting fullness, no matter, depends on how you want to translate it, is obviously referring to guijia dahuang tang because that language is literally used. Da shi tong, major fullness and pain. Restricted pulling refers to julian. Restricted pulling refers to the cramping in the abdomen, right? A baishao abdomen is this. That's a baishao abdomen. I know, why are you sitting like this? I can't stretch out. Why not? My abdominal muscles are too contracted. You can't do this. And a baishao patient, when they do this, it's like really pulls tight. This is a baishao abdominal pain. Ow, ow, ow. Right? Contracted, right? This is a chenchitang, dahuang abdominal pain. Oh. Can you lean forward? Sorry. Could you tie my shoe for me, please? I can't reach it. You know, it's like they can't reach it because they're so full in their abdomen, they can't bend forward, right? That's like fullness pain, true fullness pain. This is this contracting baishao type of pain, right? On the side, it treats abdominal pain, headache, numbness on the body, whatever. You know, he's just going off of whatever formulas he's looking at. I mean, as long as you understand the mechanism. Numbness on the body, something closes off, things can't move through, okay, same thing. Headache, like I said, the yang is too much wood going up, like guijia has headache, right? Why? Because it has baishao, right? Also because it has guijia, but also because it has baishao, right? Zhenzong tang can have headache, right? Any type of blood-related headache would have a baishao aspect to it. Yeah, it does talk about abscess swelling because there's a few formulas that have baishao in them that get rid of pus from wounds, like Painong San, particularly, which is baishao, jusha, and jiegun, right? I mean, Todo is just, his methodology is very simple. He just says, He looks at a formula. If a formula has X herb in it, and this formula fulfills function Y, then herb X fulfills function Y. Okay, I mean, that's his methodology. At least we know where he's coming from. It's not always that. I mean, it's not always very helpful, because I don't think it gives us, it doesn't always give us a good explanation as to how this herb would achieve that function that he just says, that he just described to that herb. You know what I mean? So, does Baishao in and of itself get rid of the swelling and the pus inside a swelling or an abscess? I don't know, because if it does it by itself, then why do you have to have Jegang in that formula? I mean, then wouldn't you just go with Baisha and just by itself? The fact that there is Jegang means that it has to be done in conjunction with Jegang, right? So I'm not really sure exactly on how to look at that. But, that's Todo. He's just kind of straightforward that way. And it doesn't matter at the end anyway. Why not? I know, because you wouldn't use single herbs anyway. You'd use formulas anyway. So then, if you have pus in the abdomen that you want to expel, you use a formula that expels pus, and that formula that expels pus happens to have Jegang in it. Right? So like I said, Guizhijia. So Xiaoyao Ganzhao Tang I talked about under Ganzhao. So Ganzhao strengthens the earth so it can withstand wood. But Ganzhao doesn't really go in and reduce wood directly, because sweet flavor is not a flavor that reduces wood. Sweet flavor is a flavor that moderates the wood, buffers against wood, but doesn't go in and reduce wood. Sour is the one that reduces wood, right? So Ganzhao just makes the earth stronger and protects it from wood. But Baishao is the one that actively tonifies metal and cracks down on wood and pulls wood off of the earth. So Xiaoyao Ganzhao combo is, together, they will make sure that the earth is strong enough and the wood is not abusing it. Right? And like I said, this formula has to be looked at in comparison to Ganzhao Ganjiang Tang. And Ganzhao Ganjiang Tang was the one that I said is the only formula that uses Paojiang, which makes it easy to remember. Right? Whenever there's something obscure about a formula, that always makes it easy to remember. It's like, if you have one friend with a huge mole on their face, you'll remember that. I mean, no offense to people with moles on their face, it happens, but it'll be easy to remember because it's a distinguishing feature, right? So if one formula in the whole selection of all Dondonjing's formulas has Paojiang in it, then that's a distinguishing feature for that formula, right? So that should make it actually easier to remember, not harder to remember, right? So it's just about switching your mind as to look for the distinguishing features. Don't stare at them, but look for them. So Ganzhao Ganjiang Tang talks about inability to stretch out your extremities at night. Xiaoyao Ganzhao Tang also talks about inability to stretch out your extremities at night. One is due to not enough yang in the earth. One is due to not enough yin in the earth. So Dondonjing says, and I think it's line 29, something like that, in the Shahanan, where he says, at midnight, yang returns, right? Because midnight is symbolized by, of course, the sun sets from noon to midnight, high noon to midnight, and then from midnight to high noon is the sun rising, right? From its deepest faraway point to its highest full point, right? So midnight is when the sun starts to rise again. So basically, at midnight, yang comes back, right? That's why it's often symbolized by the hexagram fu, which is the return, and it refers to the return of yang, right? A pity to fu. And basically, yang returns at midnight. So when you go to bed, yang is still in contraction, right? You go to bed, yang is in contraction, right? In the afternoon, it is very clear when I teach class. In the afternoon, everybody's yang is in contraction. Right? Contract, slight surge when class is out, woohoo, and then contract again, right? Contract to the point where you can no longer stay awake, right? So contraction, internalization. When you go to bed, it's very unlikely that you lay in your bed like this. When you go to bed, it's very unlikely to sleep like this, because it actually is not conducive of falling asleep. Right? It's too open. Your yang is actually spread out. It's easier, like I said, it's like catching a bird. It's easy to tackle big bird. It's very difficult to catch 100 tiny birds. Right? So if like this, your yang is very dispersed, so it's very difficult to recollect and astringe into the heart this very dispersed yang, right? Like it's like opening your eyes. Like it's very difficult to fall asleep with your eyes open. I mean, it's, right? Unless you have short eyelids. But because your yang is out. Your yang, when you do this and eyes open, that's yang out. Do this, that's yang in, right? So you want to stringe it in, right? So when you go to bed, you're likely to go to bed mostly in a still contracted body position with your eyes closed, right? Like this. And then you fall asleep. And then you fall asleep and you sleep to midnight. And around midnight, the contracted state of your body position that you originally went to bed with starts to relax. And Zhang Dongjing says he must have done like the Andy Warhol movie where they filmed the people sleeping, right? Zhang Dongjing must have done that, just without the camera, which makes it creepier. But at midnight, he would see that people just their body just kind of starts to sprawl, right? So after midnight, people sprawl. Before midnight, you're less likely to sprawl. Why? Because yang hasn't returned. As soon as yang starts to return, where does it return? Inside the body, inside the earth, inside the water. And the water is stored inside the earth, right? So then the yang comes back and the body warms up. It's like you go to bed with cold hands and feet. I mean, hopefully not, but you go to bed with cold hands and feet. After you slept for a while, your hands and feet warm up, especially after midnight, because yang is starting to return, right? So then you're sprawling. He says, if after midnight you're not sprawling yet, it's probably because yang hasn't returned. So you give them gancao ganjiang tang, right? Pao jiang to pull the yang into the earth because the extremities are ruled by the earth, right? Gancao to moderate contraction and to tuck it in, right? And then you have yang in your extremities. It's not leaving and floating away from the extremities. It's in the extremities. Extremities can relax. If after giving gancao ganjiang tang, which means putting yang into the earth to make you sprawl out, if you're still not sprawling out at night, he says, then it's not due to yang deficiency in the extremities, it's due to yin deficiency in the extremities. Then it's because there's yang, and the yang wants to spread out, but the tendons are too tightly, and the muscles are too tightly contracted. So there's not enough yin. So the muscles are not moist and supple and relaxed enough. He says, then you don't give them gancao ganjiang tang, you give them xiaoyao gancao tang. Bai xiao gancao combo. So not now putting yang in the earth, but now putting some yin into the earth. And then with the yin in the earth, then the extremities can finally spread out properly. That's Xiaoyao Gancao Tang. Right? So that's I think that's really nice because, you can kind of see how Bai Xiao basically makes sure that wood does not disperse the nutritive yin, whatever you want to call it, physiological fluids, away from the earth domain, but make sure that it pulls it into the earth domain. And earth domain is both abdomen, is both muscles, is actually Tai Yin skin as well. It's also part of the earth domain. I know on the 5 elements we put that with lungs, but it's actually still part of the larger Tai Yin conformation. Right? So that's how, that's why if you want to group a lot of nutritive in the center, because the center is completely robbed of its nutrition to the point where it's not able to supply to others. It doesn't even have enough for itself. Then you have to use a high Bai Xiao formula like a Jianzong Tang and really pull a lot of it into the spleen to first nourish itself before you can even start to think about having the spleen nourish others. It's like on the plane, right? When the oxygen mask falls, the adults put them on first before you put it onto the kids. Same thing. You have to rescue the spleen first before the spleen can then start to take care of others again. Right? Like a Jianzong Tang with a high Bai Xiao. Right? So that's that. Gui Jia Xiao Tang is Bai Xiao for abdominal pain. Xiao Jianzong Tang, like I said, is high Bai Xiao to nourish the spleen, to pull the nutritive into the spleen. Do not let it float away. That's why it's such a good formula for deficiency sweating. It's often a good formula for hot flashes. As simple as that, Xiao Jianzong Tang, right? People who sometimes they wake up easily after 1 o'clock in the morning, Xiao Jianzong Tang, right? Because as the wind, you hit the wood, liver, gallbladder times of the night, right? That's when wind starts to fan. It's like an internal fan comes on in your body. example, the fan comes on. If your yang is really weak, that yang will start to float. So for some people, that's sweating. For some people, that's hot flashes. For some people, that's waking up. Right? Because it fans the yang. Could be the shen that gets fanned. Could be the blood that gets fanned. Could be just the warmth that gets fanned. Right? Very often, Xiaojian Zongtang, that just fixes it. That's it. Right? Same thing with the spermatoria. Right? Yang floats away. Boom. Yin falls down. That's why Xiaojian Zongtang also treats spermatoria. Simple as that. Dangui Shaoyasan, again, abdominal pain formula. We'll talk about it more when we talk about Chuanchong, but a very high Baishao dosage. Yeah, Baishao. Pretty straightforward. Good. Any questions?
Tell me a little bit about the 48 grams and Dangui Shaoyasan.
What do you want to know?
How come so high?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know why so high. I know that it's originally a powder, and when you take it as a true powder, you're not ingesting 48 grams a day. That's true, right? The thing is, when you do the conversion, is that I look at the dosages of the other herbs, and Dangui at 9 is a very common dose for Dangui. So it's a common decoction dose for Dangui, right? So then I've used this formula with these dosages at decoction levels as well, without a problem. Just like Zhexie is a very common decoction dose. Baiju, Zhexie 24 is a decoction dose. Like Fuling Zhexie Tang has Zhexie. No, that's not true. That's Fuling at 24. Let me see. Zhexie. I'm blanking. Actually, there might not be another formula with Zhexie at 24, to be honest with you. So, I mean, yeah, so I normally just go off with the Dangui dose. Dangui dose at 9 is a common decoction dose, right? If you want to go off of the other doses, Baiju at 12, common decoction dose. Fuling at 12, common decoction dose. Zhexie, I'm blanking now. I thought there was another formula with Zhexie at 24, but I might be making that up, actually. There might not be. So, and then it brings you to Baishao and Chuanchong, and these dosages are higher than anything else we see on Baishao and Chuanchong. Like the next highest dose of Baishao is 18. Like you don't really have anything higher than 18 in any decoctions. And Chuanchong, you definitely don't have anything this high in any decoctions, right? So you could use them at lower doses if you wanted to. And then I would say probably you would do Dangui at 6, bring Dangui to 6 and bring it down all by 1/3, right? Divide by, just do only 2/3 of this dose if you really feel compelled to reduce it. But I personally have no problems with, I've used it as a decoction, I've used it as a powder, used it as a granule. These doses are fine. Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything else to say about it. But why 48? I don't know.
Dull ache in the abdomen.
Pardon?
It says for pregnant women with twisting dull ache in the abdomen.
Yeah.
We have a lot of formulas that take care of dull ache, but not at that high dose.
Right.
Super high.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Try it out. That's all I can say. Try it out. When you have a pregnant woman who comes in and she has a dull ache in the abdomen, give her the same formula and do everything only 1/3, for example. Reduce everything, just Dangui 3, Baishao 16, Chuanchong 8, something like that, and see how well that works. I mean, with granules, that's almost impossible to do because then they just, you fill the formula and they just run out of it or whatever. You do a multitude of that same dosage, but yeah, I just use it. Normally, I just use it like that. And I've had patients where even at these high dosages, the abdominal pain still didn't go away. And then the next thing to fix is adding foods to the formula. Because that's what is illustrated in the Sunisan, right? In Sunisan it says, Sunisan treats abdominal pain, right? If you're using Sunisan for abdominal pain, add foods, which basically says, Sinisan has Baishao in it. Baishao is the primary function of Baishao is abdominal pain. Patient has abdominal pain, you give them Sinisan. If they have the pulse, obviously, but let's just say they do. Now, when that patient has abdominal pain and they have the pulse of a Sinisan, and you give them Sinisan and the abdominal pain doesn't go away, then you add foods. Before you conclude that it wasn't the right formula, unless it's blatantly clear that it's not the right formula. But before you conclude, in absence of that evidence, before you conclude it's not the right formula, then you add foods to the formula. Then the abdominal pain will go away. If it doesn't go away, then indeed it wasn't the right base formula, right? So then you can employ the same rule, because Baishao primary function is abdominal pain, mostly due to spasming of stomach, large intestine tissue, right? Fujita abdominal pain is a contracting due to cold of the small intestine. That's a small intestine pain. That's a different location, right? So if you have Sinisan plus Fujita, abdominal pain normally goes away. If not, it was the wrong formula. If you have Dangwe Shayasan and you give them the formula and the abdominal pain gets a little bit better but doesn't go away completely, or does not yet go away, before you move to a different formula, add Fujita, which is a little trickier when a patient is pregnant. Not that you can't use it in a pregnancy, because Fujitang is indicated for abdominal pain with threatening miscarriage during pregnancy. So Fujitang is obviously with Fuzi and Baishao, because there's Baishao and Fujitang as well. So it's okay, but you have to be a bit more careful with that. You want to be really sure that that is indeed the pattern at hand, right? But I've used it on pregnant women on multiple occasions, Fujitang, and it works like a charm, especially when nothing else has worked. When there's, it's just a lot of cold in the abdomen causing contraction of the tissues, and that could ultimately risk squeezing the baby out. Right. So and then Dangwe Shayasan at these high doses, and then you add Fuji to it, and then that was fine, and the abdominal pain went away. So I have a few cases of that as well. So it's hard to say. So right now I just kind of go with these doses. Yeah. In an ideal world, you have everything. You have the sans, you use them as a san. If it's a san that has to be taken with alcohol, you use it as a san taken with alcohol. If it's a decoction, a tang that has to be boiled with alcohol, you boil it with alcohol. I mean, in an ideal world, we would be able to do all of that. Practically, I'm having a hard time having some of my patients just take granules, let alone having them do all the fancy other things, right? I mean, that's the challenge, yeah. But as far as using Chuanchung, in closing on this formula, as far as using Chuanchung at 24, even as a decoction, which would be pretty high, for a pregnant woman, as long as you maintain the Baishao at a 2-to-1 ratio, there is not a single grain of risk. None whatsoever. If anything, they'll be very, very happy. They will never say, oh my God, I don't feel good, it's dangerous, whatever. No. Baishao with the Chuanchung makes it safe. Yeah. And who knows? Baishao is a strong downward purging herb. Right? I mean, remember, I must have told you the story. I went to see Zheng Guanglu, who died in 2009. He was also a disciple of Tian, and a guy who my teacher knew. There were only two of the guys left who studied with Tian. And I went to visit him once, and he quizzed me, and he said, what's the strongest purging herb of the Shahanlan? I'm like, oh, yeah, as soon as they ask a question like that, it's a trick question, right? So he's thinking I'm going to say Da Huang. So obviously I'm not going to say Da Huang, right? Because then he's going to call me an idiot. So, but I know that he can't possibly think I'm that stupid. So if I'm going to say, something else, it's going to be some type of trick question. So it's a lose-lose situation. So I said, can't be Da Huang because that would be too obvious. So I guess maybe some cathartic herb like Gan Sui or Wan Hua or something like. I don't have experience with those herbs anyway. He's like, wrong. Of course. He says it's Baishao. He says when you use Baishao in a very high dose, it's a very strong purging herb. And it is true because in the Taiyin chapter, Zhang Dongjing says when people have Taiyin disease, be very careful with Baishao and Da Huang. He says be careful with Baishao and Da Huang. He's not saying be careful only with Da Huang. Da Huang is an obvious purgative herb. It's bitter. But Baishao, by virtue of shutting down, it's like Baishao causes just like paralysis in your abdomen, and it nothing can hold on to anything anymore, and then gravity does the rest. Right? Baishao strongly relaxes the smooth muscle so that actually if you use a lot of it, it purges you. Right? So chronic deficiency type, chronic constipation patterns, Shayagan Tang. Perfect. Right? Baishao, like Shayagan Tang in our system, is a stomach heat clearing formula. But it is endogenic stomach heat, not exogenic stomach heat. It's not heat superimposed onto an originally fine stomach. No, it is heat that is the product of too much wind fanning internally due to the blood deficiency dryness of wood, right, leading to an endogenic, like an internally engendered stomach heat due to deficiency of fluids. Right? It's like a gum retraction and gum problems and stomach heat from that perspective. Works really, really well. Right? So from that perspective, if you think of Baishao in that kind of classical way, and then Baishao is seen, oh, it's bitter, it's purging, it's strongly descending, reducing, and so forth, then it wouldn't come as a surprise that you need a lifting herb, a pungent, warm lifting herb to prevent too much of a descent. Right? And then, of course, that's, of course, Chuanqiong. Right? It's not about blood stasis. Yes, it's a blood stasis formula, yeah, but it's not about the blood stasis, really. Right? It's about blood deficiency, true. It's a bit of blood stasis, but it's more of a deficient type. But you need a lot of Chuanqiong to help you lift, because otherwise you wouldn't, you need the Baishao to decontract the spasming and the cramping and stop the contractions. But too much Baishao would actually drive a baby down. So you need a lift, a strong lift, and that's Chuanqiong. Well, Arnaud, why aren't we lifting with another herb? What would be the other herb that lifts? Well, that would be guizhi. But during pregnancy, Zhangdongjing doesn't use guizhi, except for in the very early stages, where it's either guizhi fulingwan, where he uses guizhi to move to try to work on the mass, or where he uses guizhi tongue in the first 60 days of the pregnancy for a little bit of nourishment, harmonizing of yin and yang, a little bit of retching, mild things, right? To lift. Because at that point you have nothing but a few cells dividing. There is no fetus that is stored, that is risk of losing, blah, 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 not real. I mean, there's a risk of losing, but not because of guizhi, for example. You need, the lift is important at that point. But anything beyond 2 months, Zhangdongjing doesn't use guizhi. Right, so he lifts with Chuanqiong. Right, and I'll talk about lifting with Chuanqiong also when I'll talk about Zhuanzar and Tang, and I'll talk about Chuanqiong some more as well. Yeah. Good. Let's break for lunch.